into the center of discussion. Ibu Anne, as we usually have the forum, we would give you like 40 to 45 minutes for talk. Make your presentation, and after that we would have question and answers or discussion. And so we would have 1.5 hours from now, to enjoy the talk, to enjoy the discussion. Ibu Anne, time is yours.
Thank you very much, Pa Anchu. Thank you. I'm so honored to be invited to visit my good friends and colleagues in Jogja. It's a real honor to be at Universitas Gadjah Mada, and I appreciate being on the series. Also to thank the American Institute for Indonesian Studies, AIFIS. I feel like I'm a scholar in waiting. Biasanya saya ke Indonesia 2 tahun yang lalu dengan dana dari AIFIS, ya. Tapi oleh karena pandemi, saya menunggu terus. 2020, I could not travel there. 2021, I could not come to Indonesia. And here we are, 2022, joining together online. So I appreciate the invitation and the opportunity to share some ideas about my current book project. And what I really hope with this session is that you take notes, that you have a lot of questions and a lot of ideas for me. One of the things I'd like us to think about is the way that we do research now. And clearly that has changed drastically, not only for us in this session, but for any colleagues that do any sort of anthropological, ethnographic, sociological research. It's a very different world these days, and it makes me think about relationships of power and the creation of knowledge and the way that is that happens. So let's think about these kind of overarching issues and have a discussion about that. Of course, my research in Indonesia would not be possible without 2 generous grants from the Fulbright Foundation and the wonderful people at Aminef, and also the sponsors of my research in the past at Universitas Islam Negeri Syarif Hidayatullah in Jakarta. And there I have Prof. Azumardi Azra, Mashikuri Abdullah, and my longtime colleague, Dadi Darmadi, all based at UIN Jakarta. I also have to give a shout out to Dr. Haja Maria Ulfa and Dr. Mukhtar Ihsan, who have been my hosts and my family in Indonesia for many years. So let's get started. And if there's anything that is unclear, or if I'm speaking too quickly, please interrupt me, okay? So what I'd like to do, in addition to telling you about my research, is to have a brainstorming workshop. So I will introduce myself, introduction of AKR in Indonesia. I'll talk about my current project, and we can discuss the ongoing methodological challenges that we are all facing right now. I believe the certain outcome of my research, my present research, will be an online, open access, so that means free, media-rich publication that, if you print it out, will look like a book, on the Luminos platform of the University of California Press. And I have some examples of books that have been published on the University of California Press open access, and I think they're quite successful in bringing rich audiovisual content right into the text. And we'll talk more about that a bit later. Let's see. Okay, there we go. So just to recap where I've worked in Indonesia, my first trip as a Fulbright scholar was in not as a Fulbright scholar, excuse me, as a trailing spouse, really. My husband was working for the Menteri Lingkungan Hidup and Bapedal in 1995 and 96. That is when I first started hearing Islam in the atmosphere. And with a background in Middle Eastern studies and having studied Arabic, this world came alive to me. And I knew that this could be a possible research topic for me. But most of the people in my field, in ethnomusicology, were studying gamelan. And in fact, I think there was a kind of anti-Islam sentiment among ethnomusicologists at that time. They didn't, many of the great scholars of Indonesia in music didn't have really a Middle Eastern studies or Arabic background, and I think found that part of cultural production in Indonesia, they were somewhat distant from that. So I knew that with my background in Middle Eastern studies, I couldn't possibly catch up with all of the Indonesianists, but that maybe there was a path, a little jalan penelitian for Ibu Anne. So in 1999, I came back as a Fulbright scholar. And over the 2000s, I came back several times for short visits to attend the Recited Qur'an, to check my photos, and I worked toward the publication of my book that Pa Anchu just mentioned. In 2017, I was there again as a Fulbright scholar, and I have just written an article about the predicament at the palace when everybody was asking me, what do you think about Sinibaca Al-Quran dengan Langgam Jawa, right? This was the big issue. And we saw the rise of populism, and we saw so many things happen during that year. It was a very exciting time to be in Indonesia. And so was 1999, a very exciting time to be in Indonesia. I returned briefly in 2019 to celebrate the publication in Bahasa Indonesia with Mizan Press of my book. And then in 2021, I found myself doing virtual, online, collaborative research with colleagues in Indonesia. So that's kind of my track record here. In my last research stint, I visited communities that I had already met, as well as some new invitations, all the way between Banda Aceh to Malang in East Java, right? So this is the part of Indonesia that I sort of know the best. And it's always important for me to tell my various audiences, students in conferences and so forth, how vast and varied Indonesia is, right? So there's so many more aspects to Indonesia than just the places and the people with whom I've studied. I've also done some work in the Arabian Gulf. So there we have the arrow there pointing to the original Lagu Makawi, right? We could talk a little bit more about that. So my publications that you may know, Women, the Recited Qur'an and Islamic Music in Indonesia, and its 2019 publication by Mizan, Merayakan Islam dengan Irama. And I love the translation of the title, because in Indonesian, I mean in English, we would think Merayakan being to festivalize, right, to celebrate. And then Irama is such a complex term that is used to describe rhythm, to describe kind of groove, but definitely to describe something that's musical, right? So so I love the title that was suggested by the by the editors and the publisher, and so many people helped me bring this to bring the Indonesian translation to fruition. Another important book that I've worked on is this edited volume with David Harnish, really important scholar of Indonesia, working primarily in Lombok. And this has, I think, 14 chapters by various anthropologists and ethnomusicologists working all over the Indonesian archipelago, but in these chapters focusing specifically on some aspect of performative Islam, right? In my spare time, I've also done some work in the Arabian Gulf, particularly in the Sultanate of Oman. And this book edited by myself and Virginia Danielson and Isa Bulos, Music in Arabia, was just released in September of 2021. So there we see kind of the necessary connection between not just nation states, right, but across the Indian Ocean world, right? These flows of people, of ideas, of technologies, material culture, the technologies of musical instruments, practices like the like the system of Arab maqamat or lagu al-Arab for recitation, and that recitation of the Quran, but also that informs so many other kinds of musical practice yang bernafaskan Islam. Yeah, does that make sense? So this is my goal, is to really think about Indonesia in the context of an Indian Ocean world. And so for you, that's one question I have for you. Where should I look? My contribution to this book, just published, The Handbook of Islam in Asia, is a prototype for the book that I want to produce. And my chapter, called The Five Pillars and Indonesia's Musical Soundscape, is linked to a website that I built with the audiovisual material of the examples that I discuss in the chapter, right? So I decided to kind of do a small, a pilot project. This is sort of the pilot project for the book that I envision, where readers can immediately click and go to links where you can see the musical and audio and video examples. So I'll show you some of those, but this is the website for the address for the website that I created. So the premise here is more than merely abstract principles of the religion that is followed by the 1.8 billion Muslims in the global ummah, and that's about a quarter of the world's population. Each of the quote-unquote pillars of Islam, Arkan Islam, requires action on the part of the individual and interaction among that individual in a social context. And my premise is that these actions are performative and also musical. Some of the goals of my work in general, but also with this publication, are to invite readers and listeners into the dynamic soundscape of religious life. And I think sometimes when we travel to new places, it's sometimes the soundscape that's really alarming to us, right? We go to a city and it's noisy and we hear, garbage trucks and cars racing up and down the street. We're not used to it. It's an assault to the senses. Or we go to the country and we hear the frogs and the crickets, and that's unusual. Right now I can hear the sound of lawnmowers outside my house. So I think so how do you invite audiences, colleagues, students into a soundscape so that they can identify what they're hearing and understand what the context for those sounds might be without seeing them, right? A lot of what we do is so visually based, right? It's based on text, on reading, on seeing, on pictures, right? How do we give the sounds that we hear meaning? Also, to reinforce Islam as an Asian religion, I didn't mean to say religious culture, but Islam is really an Asian religion, not just from the Middle East, right? And this is, this is a sort of framework that plagues all of our research, is that when we think about Islam, we think about the Arab world and so forth, and we don't automatically, it's always, we're always enlightening our families, our students, our friends, our colleagues about the importance of Islam as an Asian religion. And then my work is a kind of scholarly activism that speaks to some inherited epistemologies or mindset in my own field, certainly of religious studies, also of Indonesian studies of Indonesian music and Indonesian creative performance. So the Arkan al-Islam, the 5 pillars as an organizing device. I'm just going to go ahead and read this, if that's okay. I use the 5 pillars of Islam as an organizing device that pulls back the curtain on the resonant practice of religion. Audiovisual recordings referenced in the text provide illustrations to the performances I describe. I also attend to the transmission of such resonant praxis, paying close attention to the media technologies, from the oral traditions of the voice and the adoption of Islamic, quote-unquote, Islamic musical instruments, to material recording and broadcast technologies to include wax cylinders, records, video compact discs, and MP3 files, along with radio, television, film, and the internet. Over the long 20th century and into the present, all of these technologies have worked to facilitate an experience of the global Muslim community, or Ummah. Finally, to add another element to this analysis, I ask the reader to keep in mind the place of religious performance in the biosphere among a variety of people and communities. For example, colonial officers, coastal villagers, courts of the interior, students at religious boarding schools, musicians and artists, religious leaders, government agencies, trans-regional organizations, and most importantly for my work, not only men and boys, but women and girls. I feel like there's a lot of noise coming outside of my window right now. So I hope you, I don't know whether you can hear that or not. Okay, so in terms of my methodology, right, the participant observation of the anthropologist, while my subject position has never been as a co-religionist, when in Indonesia, I participate regularly in ritual events and educational contexts that involve religious content. As a musician, a singer, an instrumentalist, and ensemble director, and as a scholar of Arab music and culture, my role has been as performer, presenter, and collaborator, while also being a student at the intersection of religion, art, gender, and politics, as experienced in embedded and embodied public aesthetic practice. Now you must be able to hear this noise outside my window, yes?
Yeah, I heard that.
This is crazy. I can't believe all of a sudden these people are here doing things outside. Well, hopefully it won't last too long. Sorry about that. So I pursue musical practice as a method for ethnographic fieldwork and collaboration, sometimes putting myself out there in ways that have required the courage to be vulnerable. And our colleague Ronald Lukens Bull remarks of his relationships in East Java. And he writes, ethnographers are professional border crossers. The whole enterprise of ethnography is based on the ability to balance our roles as observers and outsiders and as participants and insiders. Commenting on this idea of vulnerability, Lucansbohl continues, quote, the researcher shows respect for the people he or she is working with by doing what they do, especially when asked to join them. So performing in the field in any of the roles mentioned above has sometimes resulted in uncomfortable moments and unanticipated spaces, junctures of friction where learning and exchange are the most productive, right? So, you know, as a non-Indonesian, I think it's important to say that people in Indonesia are incredibly welcoming and incredibly inviting. And you are, compared to other places where I've done research, you're invited right in to come sit down right on the floor, to take out your oud, to sing, to people hand you the microphone, to talk, and to wander in the house and look in the kitchen, see what's being cooked, watch the people making the janur, right? Visit the children. And this is very different compared to some places where I've done field research. For example, in the Arabian Gulf, it's very difficult to gain access to somebody's home. Or, for example, for a woman to visit a mosque, something like that, right? So, when we think about methodologies and performance and vulnerability of putting yourself out there, of saying, okay, sure, let's try this, or yes, I'll come and sit down right next to you. Those are the kinds of things where learning really happens in a very kind of visceral and exciting way. What about now, right? What about now when we can't have that human connection, when I can't go and perform at Pondok Pesantren Tebu Ireng after one rehearsal, which is what's happening over here in the black and white photograph. And one of the things that we sort of necessarily launched last year was the new methodology of collaborative virtual ethnography. And for this project, I contacted Muhammad Asad, who's at Pondok Pesantren Tebu Ireng in Universitas Hashim Ash'ari. He's up there in the corner with his thumbs up there. And then longtime collaborator and friend and colleague, Pak Dadi Darmadi dari UIN Jakarta, Syarif Hidayatullah. And he's down in the middle there with the mask around his neck. And I can talk more about that project, but we met regularly on Zoom, probably every 2 weeks, and we designed a project with 3 focused discussion groups that we held over the course of the spring 2021, and then we have presented our research at 2 conferences so far, the APHIS MSU conference last July, and then, or last June, I believe it was, and then also another conference sponsored by UIN Jakarta. It works in some ways, as we've all discovered. So many people can join from so many different places. It's not expensive. In some ways, this new reality has leveled the playing field, right? No longer am I the privileged researcher from the West that can write a grant, that can get support, that can jump on an airplane and, travel to faraway places to do research, right? Now I have to get on Zoom like everybody else, and I am stuck at home, right? But the good news is that you can get on Zoom too. So I would love to hear your thoughts about the ways that these new methodologies, or the prevention of doing research in the way that we usually do it, how these things are affecting our research. And again, I apologize for this noise outside, but now you can have a bit of a flavor, right? A flavor of my world here in Virginia. So thinking about Indonesia in terms of being part of the Indian Ocean soundscape, I would like to join these blue humanities. And there's been so much research on the Indian Ocean in counterpoint to thinking of continents and nation states as the units of study, right? And there's a very long bibliography that I'm only, beginning to master, and so that's part of my charge. But when we think about the ways in which sound travels, right? Sound can travel. Mountains can't travel. Monuments can't travel. Palaces can't travel. But sounds can travel. So how has that happened? Both historically, but in the contemporary moment, right? So here again, I'm going to ask you for help. In terms of colonial histories of hearings of Southeast Asia, we know that the early colonial officers, for example, Snoekorgronya, were so interested in the sounds of Islam, of recitation, of singing, and he made 300 wax cylinder recordings in Batavia and also in Mecca. And this is one of those recordings. This picture here on the bottom left is me holding one of the wax cylinders in the collection at the university in Leiden. And I thank my colleague, Anne van Ostrom, who invited me to Leiden, and of course to the Kampung Indonesia, who found me immediately. Not only were they nice to me, but within one day, in fact, the afternoon that I arrived, they had a bicycle for me, right? And this is key. You cannot do anything in the Netherlands, right, without a bicycle. So thank you to the Indonesian graduate students in Leiden for the bicycle and the good food and the good camaraderie. I think if we look back to that very earliest technology of recording and see the way it is immediately adapted to the interests of researchers, right? We see a pattern whereby every technology is immediately adapted to the needs of the people who want to use it. Even in the most unsuspected corners of society, right? We wouldn't immediately imagine recording technology used to document, religious performance, right? But here we have it, and in fact, excuse me, that should be 1888. Excuse me, 1899. This is, I reversed the letters, but Syed Uthman, an Indonesian of Hadrami origin, issued a comprehensive fatwa on the use of phonography in 1899, not 1988, sorry, 1899, comprising a list of rhetorical questions on the commodification of Islamic language performance, right? Was it okay? Was it really still, the Quran, if it was recorded? Was it okay to listen to it if it wasn't live? Did it mean the same thing? Was it permissible? So this tells us that modern mass media and its ability to capture sound was a curiosity and a concern in exactly the way it is today, right? Exactly the way it is today. So how do we get to the development of these musical arts of Islam Nusantara, of a hugely diverse area, right? One place to stop and talk about is obviously the legend, the legacy of the Wali Songo, right? Many people will stop and say, well, of course, it's the Wali Songo that encouraged this rich performative culture that used music, that used singing, that used wayang and other dramatic forms to spread Islamic teachings, right? So rather than prohibition, the framework for religious proselytization and learning was through the arts, right? So this is one place to explain why is Indonesia one of the richest cultures of Islamic musical performance in the world, right? I need to learn more about the cultivation of Muslim identity in the Indian Ocean world at the time of Indonesian independence. And one of the places to look is the Asia-Africa conferences of 1955 and 1965, a place where I would love to. I was told, by many of my colleagues in Indonesia when I was doing research in the 1990s, that it was actually in the Conference Asia Africa in Bandung where the first Recited Qur'an were held, right? If I could find some more information on that, on the exchange of Islamic performance and the use of religious performance as diplomacy, right? If people have ideas about that, I think that's an important juncture in placing the development of Indonesian religious performance in this larger context. Next, okay. So, for example, already in 1956 and 1962, we have Himpunan Seni Budaya Islam, the Association for Islamic Arts and Culture, as well as the Les Bumi, a group that I have met and hung out with. The Lembaga Seniman Budayawan Muslim Indonesia, right? The Institute of Indonesian Muslim Arts and Cultures. Artists and cultural figures. I think that's the way we would translate that. So there's another area for me to explore. Suggestions welcome. And then, the other thing that I'm always attendant to is the extraordinary role of women in Indonesian public religious life, public performative religious life. And again, the idea that these are women's bodies doing sacred things. These are female bodies where religious knowledge is embodied and then broadcast and for others to experience in the context of kind of a religious discourse around Islam that gets stuck on the woman problem, right? Kind of gets stuck on the permissibility of women's voices, women's bodies, the presence of women. Just a quick note on this. This is a Khatam al-Qur'an. It is at the ceremony of Tujuh Bulanan, the 7-month pregnancy ceremony held at the home of one of Suharto's grandsons, right? So I guess it would be the great granddaughter of Suharto who's being celebrated here. Again, after this part of the event, we went into another room for all the Javanese parts of the Tujuh Bulanan ceremony, and again, women's voices making that whole religious part possible. How about a little video clip here? So if we think about resonant praxis and we're thinking about the 5 pillars, where, and I don't know, I just kind of landed on the 5 pillars as a way of saying, okay, what do most people learn about Islam, right? Most students, your aunt, your uncle, whatever, they learn about these 5 things, the confession of faith, prayer 5 times a day, the holy month of Ramadan, etc., right? And so they learn about these things like, okay, now I know about Islam. Well, what do each of those rooms in this house of Islam, right? What kind of performance, what kind of sounded resonant praxis goes on? Let's try something that you're all familiar with, and hopefully hopefully the computer sound is louder than the sound outdoors. Let's give it a try. Okay, silakan.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Pelan saja ya Bu ya, pelan aja ya.
Boleh.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
Ya salam, ya salam. Terima kasih banyak ya.
Terima kasih, terima kasih.
Okay, silakan. Okay. So one question for you is, one of my premises is that hearing Islam in the atmosphere is not a choice. It's not an option in Indonesia. You're going to hear it. The architecture is porous, and sound is broadcast, right? Things are often amplified. Even the tahlilan or the pengajian in a neighborhood will be amplified, right? Someone will have a microphone. So the idea is that everybody can hear it. So my question to you is, has this changed? Is this changing with the pandemic? With the, not that all I want to do is focus on the pandemic, right? But I think we try to find, normative things as anthropologists, right? We describe the particular, we move into the normative, right? And then we also try to interpret particular positions, right? So if I'm saying, well, everybody, this is what Indonesia sounds like, well, maybe it doesn't sound like that anymore, right? Maybe that experience is not as quotidian or normal as it was, 2 or 3 years ago. This person that I'm filming, Pa Zaini Lubis in Medan, he's an important reciter. He's a qori, he's a teacher and a judge of Quranic recitation. And I met him originally in the Musabaqa Tilawatil Qur'an in Palangka Raya in 2004. He's a leader of IPQA, which is Ikatan Persaudaraan Qori Qori'ah dan Hafiz Hafiza, Indonesia. And they do certain performances, they make recordings. And for me, he's one of many, many people who confirm the connection between good recitation and good singing, right? And so the idea that there is a continuum in language performance between the most sacred language performance and that which is around the edges, right? Which is paraliturgical or even for recreation and entertainment. I think it's also interesting because we often hear the muezzin, but we don't necessarily see him up close, and all of the things that a good muezzin is doing to produce a beautiful azan, right? All of the ways that he's shaping his mouth so the sound resonates in his mouth, the way the language is pronounced and so forth. And remember again that I'm writing for people like you, but I'm also writing for outsiders, right? So let me just play another example. This is an audio example to think about the azan in context, what I'm hearing all the time without seeing it from inside my room. And I'm going to mute myself so you don't hear this terrible noise outside and play this audio example of azan in Ciputat Baru, and you tell me what you hear. Okay, I'm going to pause that there. The example that I was that I think is even more interesting than this one actually has all this solawatan, people singing various solawat, and then it's time for azan, and so then you hear the Arabic of the azan, right? So all of these different kinds of language performance, how are they where are they on these nodes of Indian Ocean connections, right? Another point for discussion. Let me move along here. So let's talk about Ramadan, right? Where restraint and abstention from so many things is important, but at the same time, indulgence, right? Indulgence in wonderful eating traditions, in wonderful visiting traditions, and in this one of many examples of special Ramadan wake-up music. Let's try this. Okay, I'm going to pause it there. So this is a group warming up outside of the wonderful Malang City Center Mall, getting ready to go on one of many groups in a Lomba Patrol, and one of many Lomba Patrol that was happening during Ramadan in Malang in 2017. So, you know, there's feast and famine, there's abstention and indulgence during the month of Ramadan, and of course afterwards, that is rich with the performance, the expressive performance of religion, abundant language performance in all corners of life. So there's so many ways that we could talk about this performance. I mean, the fact that these bamboo instruments are relatively user-friendly and available, the ways in which this performance reflects principles of musical organization in Indonesia that are unique to Southeast Asia, and the ways in which this performance might also resonate or reflect a kind of a musical discourse beyond Indonesia. So what other kinds of wake-up music are there, right? What other kinds of patrol are there around the Indian Ocean that we might be able to connect to this? Let's move along. Okay. You know, when we think about the technologies of Islamic performance, let me just get my list here. For example, the migration of instrument technologies around the Indian Ocean, and the instruments in Indonesia that are thought of as Islamic instruments, right? Here's another example of what do I want to say? Let's just play it. Terbang Jidor, right? I use this example not because it's great, not because they're at the top of their game, but to just show how widespread participation in this kind of performance activity is for just regular folks, right? This is also in Malang, but so many musical genres, gambus, hajar marawis, terbang jidor, qasida rabana, all of those names of the musical styles reference the very instruments that are there, right? Terbang jidor, hajar marawis, qasida rabana, right? Gambus. The names of the genres are the names of the instruments. That is uniquely Indonesian and immediately references these sort of Islamic instruments that have their roots in other Indian Ocean ports of call, right? So how the migration of these instrument technologies is a part of the study that that manifests itself through kind of the calendrical cycle of the Muslim. Okay. So thinking about the Hajj as both a crossroads of travelers who arrive for pilgrimage and scholarship, as well as a melting pot of merchants from all over the overland and maritime Silk Road, helps us to understand the migration of instrument technologies. Called by many names, these instrument technologies include double reed aerophones, there's a bunch of them, frame drums, and the bedug and the gambus. Because these instruments originate in West and Central Asia and Islamic areas rimming the Indian Ocean, their timbres and associated playing techniques index Muslimness, whether heard in a mass gathering for the singing of solawat or popular dangdut. And as I just mentioned, many of the genre names are also the instrument names. Okay, I need to hurry up. The last thing I'll just mention is women's agency and ingenuity in times of COVID have been really interesting to me, connected, of course, by social media. But here is Nasidriya at Dugderan, the village cleansing ceremony before Ramadan in Semarang in 2017. And here they are on social media, as they are at least once a day or a few times a week, with the fourth generation of women from Nasidriya, now identified as Azura, right? So here they are, informal meet and greet, video clips with their kids and so forth. I could pause here and take questions, but let me just talk for a moment about, for a couple of minutes, about the importance of an open access publication. Okay, so we'll kind of shift away from the content. A few objectives of online media-rich open access publishing, and I'm happy to share these particular notes with you. One, I want to be able to easily reference and refer to the audiovisual materials for teaching, for presentation, and for the readers. It's these materials that represent the foundation of my research and really academic activism. Secondly, I want to make these materials accessible to the people who are in the photographs, who are in the videos, and to acknowledge them and share these materials with them in a way that is free and accessible. And to also allow their commentary and to allow other uses and other interpretations of those materials. Eventually, an archive of such materials could stand alone for other researchers and other consultants from the field to have a look at. Fourthly, to participate in digital humanities and to adapt to the constant upgrade of techniques, tools, and platforms. This is something that is become, more and more de rigueur, like we have no choice, for all researchers, right? So to be able to make our materials accessible, but then constantly update them so that they remain accessible. And obviously to do an open access online project, ideally with Luminos, well, definitely with Luminos, which is part of University of California Press. And these are some really good examples of recent open access publications where media is completely integrated with the text, right? So you can do both, one alongside each other. We can return to those examples if you're interested. So again, the idea of curating archives and libraries of materials for future scholars, to describe the objects that are the center of your research, to, there are often hyperlinks, you may have them in your footnotes or whatever, but a reader might not necessarily be able to find them. So how can you really have something that you can click in the text? And I would suggest Emily Wilcox's book on Chinese dance. The format is just really phenomenal in terms of, you're reading along, there's a photograph, you click on it, and it starts dancing, right? It's you don't have to go out of the screen. You don't have to go find your own. You don't have to paste a link into your browser. It's pretty great. Usually text drives the examples, right? We write, or talk, and then we play one example, or we show one picture or one video clip, right? Why not flip that and have the examples drive the text? That would be, in some senses, ideal. And then finally, open access publishing helps us to think of readership more broadly and in an international way. Collaborative digital ethnography and reception focus groups are part of my current research. How can this be demonstrated in a book? Another advantage, I think, is that you can't track pirated versions of your work, but you can track digital use. So that's also an interesting point. And then, the history and inspiration for this project has been fueled by lockdown, thinking about decolonizing knowledge production, this collaborative research project, and I feel like it's time. So maybe I can stop sharing and we could open the floor, and now the noise has gone away. But I want to thank you very, very much. Let's talk about it with the time we have remaining. And please note my email address, akrasm@wm.edu. So thank you so much for your patience and for tolerating my soundscape.
Thank you very much, Ibu Anne. Thank you very much. Very interesting. Many of what you presented, like examples of the sounds, are familiar to us. And I think many times we take them for granted. We hear them, but we don't, probably just because part of our life, we take them for granted. We listen to them, we just let them go. But you make it so significant. You make them, their presence to be meaningful in terms of what they contribute to the way we should understand Islam in relation to music, in relation to art, and more specifically in relation to gender, the role of women. Thank you very much. We would come to the question and answer, discussions. As we see in the chat room, we have already questions, and I will read it for you, Bu Anne.
Please.
And after that, and you will respond to it. So we have one question in Bahasa. I know that you understand that perfectly, the Indonesian, but I probably, for our audience outside, I would probably translate it a little bit, just for audience to see. So, Bu Ana, this is from Muhammad Hatibul Umam. how did you choose Sumenep as part of your research area? Who recommended you, to come to Sumenep?
Sumenep. Saya kurang mengerti Sumenep.
Sumenep
Singkatan.
is in Madura. Is Java? Madura.
Madura. Aha.
So he is focusing on, he said that I saw in your book mentioning Ahmad bin Ta'lab. And this make me wondering, I wondered that directly I was involved in the musical activities of Hadra in Sumenep, Madura in 1975 to 2000, about 2002, where Ahmad bin Ta'lab as the one who popularized the music. And in addition to Ahmad bin Ta'lab, Ahmad bin Ta'lab also become the students of my father in JKWH. I think the name of the organization in Sumenep, about 1963. And
Wow.
and he also said that he had documented, Pak Khatibul Umam documented the picture of his father. So
Wow.
you have something on that?
Yeah, so interesting. I'm not sure where you found that name. Sebenarnya saya belum ke Madura, but obviously there are a lot of Madura practices in East Java, and many people pointed me in that direction. And I think, when you do ethnographic research, it's as much a matter of design. Like saya mau kesini, saya mau bicara dengan budayawan itu, but also just somebody invites you, ada undangan ke perkawinan di Jogja, okay, ayo, let's go, okay, ada undangan ke musabaqah tilawatil Qur'an in Palangkaraya, okay, let's go. And you try to create a narrative out of all of these different experiences, some intentional by design and others by chance. So I know there are so many important areas of Indonesian Islamic practice yang saya belum menyaksikan, ya, and I am so welcoming kalau ada Pak Khatibul Umam yang mau bagi-bagi sumber-sumber dari arsip ayahnya, dari tradisi Madura. I would be honored, and I'm wondering, what is the best way to talk to all of you, to continue the conversation? Sekarang lewat Zoom bisa, ya, bisa konversasi setiap hari, setiap minggu. And so I would be very happy, and especially since I can't travel and meet you. This is what's so frustrating, yeah? So,
Right.
terima kasih. Ya, mungkin.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So why don't we invite Pak Muhammad Khatibul Ummam to speak about it? For that. Probably he has a lot of things to share in relation to music. The practice. Silakan, Bu.
Boleh dengan bahasa ya, Mas Samsul.
Gimana, Bapak? Boleh, Pak, berbagi, Pak?
Boleh ya, terima kasih. Karena kebetulan saya sebenarnya majornya sosiologi, cuma tertarik di penelitian di bidang musik gitu. Kebetulan S1 saya dulu di Jogja itu penelitian tentang musik dangdut dan kaum muda. Nah, jadi saya juga main musik gitu di Jogja. Kenapa saya juga tertarik ke isu-isu ethnomusicology, musik, termasuk juga buku yang ditulis oleh Ibu An ini bagi saya sangat menarik karena kenapa bersentuhan langsung dengan saya sehari-hari gitu. Saya juga sebenarnya ada beberapa narasumber sebenarnya yang mungkin menarik ya jika ini nanti bisa bertemu dengan Ibu An untuk penelitian lebih lanjut, misalnya fokus tentang ke perempuannya atau ke salah satu grup musiknya, atau mungkin ke beberapa narasumber terkait dengan koriknya juga ada yang masih ada sekarang tuh juga mungkin saya bisa menghubungkan gitu, Mas, dengan beberapa narasumber yang sebenarnya saya juga tertarik tentang nulis hadrah sendiri. Di Sumenep kan juga bagian dari kelanjutan tilawah juga. Jadi dari tilawah kemudian muncul yang namanya musik hadrah, kemudian yang dipopulerkan oleh Ahmad bin Ta'lab ini, dan ini juga terjadi proses perubahan alirannya. Ini juga menarik juga. Saya juga sebenarnya tertarik untuk meneliti tentang ini, cuma masih belum terlaksana sampai saat ini begitu. Jadi untuk malam ini saya bertemu dengan Ibu An via Zoom ini, saya sangat senang sekali ya. Dulu saya juga pernah ketemu dengan Bapak Andrew Wentrup, karena saya juga dangdut kan, nulis dangdut dulu. Ketemu juga di pasca sarjana UGM juga, dulu saya ketemu ketika peluncuran bukunya itu.
Bagus
ya.
ya.
Jadi saya tetap masih ingin masih mengembangkan penelitian tentang musik, terutama musik-musik yang masih belum banyak diteliti oleh para akademisi di bidang musik terutama. Demikian, terima kasih Bu Ana, senang sekali bisa bertemu dengan Ibu Ana malam ini.
Terima kasih, sangat generous ya. Saya siap. Ayo kita bisa bikin rapat lewat Zoom. Tolong kalau ada email, kita bisa terus menerus dengan konversasi, dan kalau Anda bisa bagi-bagi sumber-sumber, dan saya sangat tertarik in your experience and your interests and your knowledge. So thank you. And this is your father's album that you put in the chat, and saya bisa klik dan download, ya. Atau yeah, dan bisa, and we can save the chat also in case we don't get to everybody's.
Sure. Yeah.
Great. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you Pak Muhammad Otibul Humam for that. So Bapak praktisi menghidupi musik itu. There is something from that, I think, Ibu Ann, that he said about his observation, because he is also experiencing like the development of the gender from tilawa to become hadra, like the changes of musical genres. Did you also observe like that, or did you also pay attention to how Islamic music like changes from time to time, like their genres? Through which we could observe how Islam are transforming, like in Indonesia, transforming, become from one type to another type, like from time to time. Did you also observe like that?
Well, that's the key question, right? How does practice change over time? What keeps it stable? Most of these practices, whether it's hadra or maybe not gambus, but something like hadra, they're not written down. These irama, they are not written down. So, for example, if we have, if we have a culture of sort of, populism and Islam keras that says, you know what, performance is not a good idea, right? This time we will not have a pawai. Tidak bisa we can't have entertainment in the lomba tilawatil Quran. Lomba saja. Tidak bisa grup dansa, tidak bisa grup hadra, tidak bisa grup qasida, right? Tidak boleh. What happens when the culture changes like that? What happens now when there are fewer gatherings among people? How does oral tradition prevail, right? Now, recording is one way, right? We've always used recording to study performances of the past. But, thinking about history in short versions, or kind of the long history of bagaimana alat terbang datang ke Indonesia, bagaimana tradisi-tradisi, reciting with terbang, how did this all begin? This is all the beauty of ethnography, right? Collecting people's stories and what they think about about these practices. So I'm not sure that's a very good answer. I'm just saying that it's a very good question.
Yeah, thank you very much. Now, it just reminds me, I have a student now working on wedding Sharia, like a wedding organization, wedding ceremonies, that as bands, musical bands, now some of them are now like demanded, to perform Islamic music, for that. And that we also see that, last, like before the pandemic. And, my students is working on that to show like how Islamic music come to that like secular setting,
Mhm.
become performed and also become popular.
Well,
Like the people are insisted to have that. So yeah.
you this is a very interesting development in the course of the 20 plus years that I've been doing research in Indonesia. There are now so many students and professors who are also doing research on quote unquote Islamic music, right? And if you look at UIN Jakarta or UIN Jogja, UIN Malang, UIN wherever, to have a department of Islamic arts, right? I mean, there's enough there. It didn't used to be such a category of study, but now I think there's so much interest, and it's so obviously such a rich context for performance, visual arts, theater, that gives birth to students like yours who are interested in how religion plays a role in expressive life, in entertainment, in the construction of identity, right? Not the dogmatic, theocratic part of religion, but the fun part, the merayakan Islam dengan irama part, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think one of them is the one who raised question here, Mbak Imas. She said she cannot open the mic because it's raining very heavily in her place. So I would also just read it for you.
Okay.
Okay. So hi Ibu Ann, so delighted to hear your presentation on this Islamic soundscape. I am Imas. I have read your book on women recited the Quran while in the undergraduate. Wow. And when in postgraduate, I studied about Quranic recitation that circulated on YouTube by Ammar TV. My research centralized the celebrity image that has been built by this practice, which I stated as Quranic celebrity. I found that the existence of the Quranic celebrity has significant impact on shaping Quranic soundscape over digital space. Meanwhile, they also build kind of pious modern trends. Gaul, mereka menjadi gaul among Muslim youth in Indonesia. Many young Muslims are inspired to regularly recite and memorize the Quran because of their popularity. So the celebrity tried to popularize Quranic recitation by putting the recitations on video,
Yeah.
on YouTube, which is Murattal recitation, not Mujawad recitation like Ibu Maria Ulfa and Muammar did on the past decades. So what do you think about those current phenomena?
Yeah, it's really interesting. Thank you so much. And I would love to discuss your experience and your work more with you. And I invite you to add your email to the list or just contact me. I promise I'll respond to you. This is Ba Imas, yeah? Ibu Imas? Yeah?
Yes.
Yes, I've heard of this. I was really interested in is it Muzammal Hasbullah, this reciter, very popular from ITB Bandung, and some of the modern reciters who also do muratal, and also don't really touch the Arabic maqamat that much. It's a different style. And, as we know, to recite the Quran well takes a lot of practice, right? It takes a lot of listening, a lot of practice, and, spending time with Maria Ulfa and going with her to all of her tese, her training centers, and so forth. But it's certain that there's a kind of a modern Marato style that emphasizes memorization and emphasizes maybe the sort of therapeutic aspects of the Quran to help you sleep, to reduce stress. And, this is very much part of a kind of a modern, hip, gaul way of being. I would be really interested in learning about the way that those younger reciters are learning, and because I don't think they're learning in the way that Maria Ulfa and her students are learning, right? I think this is a different kind of pedagogical culture that's happening, and why and how. So mass media, social media, YouTube is kind of propelling these newer modes of recitation, both in terms of the technicalities of the recitation and the culture of that recitation. Yeah. So I don't know, Imas, Bu Imas, if you're still with us, if you'd like to join, or if we should talk later.
Yeah. Yes.
Very much.
Sorry guys, can you hear me? Because the rain is so heavy and crazy here.
We can
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Bu En, to respond my question. Yes, correct. I also see that this phenomena is kind of the new style or the changing style of Quranic pedagogical. If we compare this phenomena with Ibu Maria Ulfa, or what happened in MTQ or JHQ, right? Because I still remember when I'm in high school, I also participate in MTQ event in Indonesia, and I still recognize how popular it is, the Mujawat style, what you call that it needs practice and hard work in how to become how to be able to recite the Quran properly and with a beautiful tone and so on. But what I found in Muzamil Hasbala and others like Kaki Malik and so on, they also teach people, especially the young Muslim, how to recite the Quran with Muratal style. Like so, they hold the seminar and kind of YouTube content which teach young Muslim how to recite the Quran properly. Like they how to say memperkenalkan. They introduce some nagam in Quran recitation like Bayati, Soba, Nahawan, and so on, and how to apply those langgam in Quranic recitation, but in Muratal style, not in Mujawat style. And I also found that there is kind of what we call pergeseran tren dalam Quran yang dikenal oleh masyarakat.
Mbak Imas, yang terakhir apa pergeseran? Sebelum pergeseran apa, Mbak? Nggak kedengaran tadi.
Bahwa saya menemukan bahwa Muzamil Hasbalah dan apa yang popularitas dari Muzamil Hasbalah dan kawan-kawan ini membentuk pergeseran tren dalam membaca Al-Quran. I mean, tren bacaan Al-Quran atau gaya bacaan Al-Quran yang populer di masyarakat.
Dan Ines, bisa saya tanya, dari mana pengaruh gaya muratal begitu? Apakah ada influence? Apakah ada influence dari mungkin reciters in the Gulf, in the negara Teluk? Apakah ada influence dari kori-kori di negara Teluk?
Perubahan itu tadi apakah dipengaruhi oleh misalnya yang dari Arab gitu, dari Timur Tengah?
Iya, I found that, so saya menemukan bahwa kori-kori besar atau imam-imam besar yang menjadi kiblat mereka itu adalah imam-imam besar Timur Tengah yang kaset muratalnya populer di Indonesia, seperti siapa? Abu Sudais, Abu Sudais dan kawan-kawan.
Ya, saya merasa seperti gaya muratal itu ada pengaruh lebih dari kori dari negara Teluk, dari Saudi, dari Kuwait. Tapi tidak lagi tidak lagi dari Mesir, dari Suria, tidak lagi. Dan apa implikasi maqamat Arab agak what should I say? It's lebih ringan, ya. It tidak mendalami sistem maqamat lagu Arab seperti di Mujawad Ibu Maria Ulfa dan kawan-kawan. So very interesting. Yeah.
That's what I mean.
Yeah, so good. Yeah, are you doing research in this area, or is this just an observation for you?
This is my research for my MA thesis.
So interesting. So this is what I need to do. I need to be connected, and really, I think it would be helpful for all of us. For me to be connected to, people who are doing their thesis on, Islamic performance phenomena, because it's such a growing. Is it more in what discipline? Is it in music? Is it in anthropology? Is it in religious studies? Or
I read this thesis in Quranic discipline. So basically, I learned Quranic studies in UIN Sunan Kalijaga.
And so more in terms of religious studies, yeah. Beautiful.
You also have it not as a discipline or a major, but some students in art studies. Art and performance studies who study, some students in that program, like the one, Tri Cahyo is here from that program. Some of students in that program, study program also, do research on such things, Islamic music, art.
Yeah.
We have a lot, Ibu, yeah?
Yeah. And this is more from the public universities, right? As opposed to the Islamic university system where you have the arts departments, right?
Yeah, the one from Mbak Imas is from the Islamic University.
Okay. But from the arts departments, that would be more from like UGM or interesting.
So there is intersection among those programs in this.
And there may be more questions. I know you're looking, but if anybody wants to raise their hand, please do. What is the status of thinking about, Indian Ocean studies in Indonesia? Because I know in English language scholarship, the sort of Indian Ocean world seems to be all the rage. You know, if you really start looking at whether it's the work of Enseng Ho or, you know, so many scholars after that are really trying to make these connections. And I'm wondering if I'm sort of, forcing the point, or if it is something that's also interesting to Indonesian scholars to think about the historical influence and connections and the contemporary influence and connections. What's your thought, Pak Ancho?
We have been concerned with that. Part of it is that we feel that we are disconnected with our neighbors and more connected to the very long, distance. Some of us have been aware of how we engage much, with the West, with the Arab, but not very much with our neighbors even. And so there is something that we could develop and we should develop, to share, because we live with the historical, with the inherited history. We still live with them, but this is my own observation. Again, we take them for granted without making them meaningful, to develop. And so I think what you're doing is to introduce us the significant part of it, to develop. And I myself was involved in a fellowship with Southeast Asian scholars, young scholars. That is what we were aware of. Like we use language of others, not ours, because we are so much disconnected to one another. We kind of like live in very similar tradition, even we share the tradition, but we use, other concepts, other language. So there has been an awareness on that we should, take into account.
So, Pak Ancho, you're saying you share traditions with what neighbors, for example?
Like even from Malaysia, from Southeast Asians up to India.
Yeah.
China.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, the legacy of sort of trade and travel, however romanticized, right, was the way of, connection and interaction before. Now, of course, our interactions are like this, right? They are, they are mediated by technology and not so much by, by the physical reality of the natural world guiding our movements. And so we can be more selective, I think. We can say, like, okay, Indonesia wants to interact with the West. Indonesia wants to interact with the Arab world, right? But Malaysia, India, Sri Lanka, khalas, doesn't matter so much, right? Then, the question is, I guess, how does popular culture circulate around the Indian Ocean? So very, very interesting to hear your perspective. Yeah.
Thank you, Ibu. We have Muhammad Hatibul Umam raising his hand. I think that would be the last one, considering the time for this, for the official forum, for our official forum. So, Mas Imam, Umam, silakan.
So I speak in bahasa ya, Mas ya.
Boleh.
Jadi sebenarnya pertemuan ini menurut saya sangat bagus sekali. Kenapa? Karena penelitian terkait dengan seni ya, terutama musik ya, di Indonesia ini masih sangat terbatas dan kurang mendapat dukungan ya. Saya punya pengalaman karena 2012 saya pernah diterima di program Master of Art in International Performance Research di Warwick University. Tapi ketika apply LPDP pada waktu itu, kemudian diwawancara, jadi jurusan pertunjukan dan seni itu dianggap tidak prioritas gitu. bukan prioritas dan dianggap nomor sekian gitu. Sehingga pada pertemuan berikutnya kemudian itu mulai mencuat karena banyak beberapa teman-teman yang ada yang ambil dance studies, ada yang ethnomusicology juga, dia tidak mendapatkan tempat yang cukup baik begitu ya dari lingkungan kita begitu. Sehingga baru-baru ini kemudian studi tentang seni ya, studi tentang seni terkait juga musik kemudian punya tempat khusus gitu. Terlebih kemudian banyak akademisi seni ya, misalnya teman-teman ISI ya dari Jogja itu banyak yang kemudian melakukan penelitian menarik dan kemudian banyak memberikan kontribusi terutama di bidang seni budaya Indonesia, terutama setelah banyak isu-isu budaya-budaya Indonesia yang kemudian dianggap sebagai budaya dari negara lain ya. Hal-hal yang seperti itu kemudian menjadi evaluasi tersendiri bagi pemerintah kita. Dan dengan adanya forum ini saya senang sekali kepada Ibu Ane ini bisa membuat kita yang punya ketertarikan di bidang penelitian tentang seni dan musik ya, itu bisa punya semangat yang lebih lagi gitu ya dengan adanya forum ini. Terima kasih sekali lagi Ibu Ani.
Oh, terima kasih banyak. Dan sebenarnya saya mimpi kalau bisa ke UGM untuk profesor tamu seperti supaya bisa bergabung dengan mahasiswa yang tertarik, yang ada pengalaman, yang ada orang tuanya, yang ada grandparents atau yang dari daerah yang menarik, dan kita bisa penelitian, dan saya bisa I can learn from you, but also maybe help with some kind of framework for studying, for asking certain questions of the traditions that you know and to which you are connected. So nanti habis pandemi, saya senang kalau bisa pass some time at UGM seperti like guest professor. I think that would be really a lot of fun for me.
Oh, that is great, Bu Anne. And I think that is among the things, like among the outcomes that we could expect from this forum, to continue to sustain our conversation with more talk, with more research, with more, engagement in academic and also, and I think what you do with the website, facilitating more research on that, could be developed to when you come here with some students who have been working with that, to collaborate with. And so, yeah, thank you for opening that to Anne. And we, of course, would like to invite you, welcome you when you come to Indonesia and facilitate this conversation among those who are interested, like Mas Umam and also Mbak Imas. And so for Mas, you have the emails already, so we could, of course, Mas Umam, yeah, you have Ibu Anne's and also Mbak Imas,
yeah,
Anne's emails, and of course, if we have some, following activities after this, we could, follow up the engagement.
Yeah, and that would be great. And also saya setiap hari membuka WA ya. Saya lewat WA terus ya. Especially with my colleagues, sharing posters and documents and photographs and messages and so forth. So I'm happy to, if you send me an email, we can also be connected on.
Thank you, Ibu. And I think being that said, we come to the end of our official forum. Bu Anne, thank you very much for that. I myself learned a lot, and the things that I, of course, would like to develop more is, in relation to my concern, to my own research, like looking at this soundscape through which we could see how Islam transform, how Islam interact with others, other religions, other cultural things. I mean, we see how the engagement of Islam in Indonesia is so rich, and that could make us so rich, in understanding the way we see and also live with. And like what kind of things that Islam interact and how the interaction shape and being shaped, by shape Islam and being shaped by others too. So that is what I'm so interested in looking at your work, contribute a lot to that, making Islam so rich actually, the way we live it in Indonesia. So
Well,
thank you very much, bro.
thank you very much. And it's really, I depend on young scholars like you, Indonesian scholars, to say, to also guide me and say, sometimes things that are so obvious to you are the things that interest me because I know I'm also learning about them and teaching them to other audiences, right? So if the things that I'm talking about make you pause and say, wow, that really is interesting. Or I also encourage you to tell me, that's not that interesting. Or this is too obvious, right? You should really be looking at this, at something else. Like this other thing is more significant. I also invite this kind of critique. So,
All right.
yeah, thank you.
Okay, Ibu. So I think we will continue our discussion for the next. And again, thank you very much. Thank
Oh,
you to IFIS for facilitating, bringing Ibu Ann to us, and expect to engage more for this discussion. Thank you very much to those participants coming to this evening. We expect you to come back, everyone, for the next Wednesday forum. This is a regular forum that we have in every Wednesday. So we will post publicize the information about next week. So we hope we could get a lot of lessons from this for us, to be happy during this pandemic, situation.
yeah.
And thank you very much for bringing also the way to think of new methodologies for us to see there's so many opportunities, chances that we could engage for more development. Ibu. Thank you very much.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And good evening to all.
you. Take care.
Good evening. Thank you.